Hi everyone, this is Kate Pinvari, Marketing Coordinator at Ritchie May & Co. I'll be helping field questions in the webinar today. Thank you everyone for coming out today to join us. Each of the presenters will introduce themselves more in depth as we get to them. Just a few housekeeping items. Everyone joining the webinar today is on mute, so if you have any questions today, go ahead and ask them in the questions panel in the chat, or raise your hand and I can unmute you and we'll pipe up. It will be a more conversational webinar today. If we cannot get to your question towards the end, I will make sure to get your question passed along, and we will start an email string with you and the experts who can answer that question for you. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you need to jump off for any reason, we will send you the video recording and the slide decks to everyone so you can review what you missed or have for reference, and that will be available, and I'll just distribute that within the next few days. And please feel free to pass it along and share it with anyone that you might think could benefit from it at your organization. If you think of any questions or comments after the webinar today, feel free to contact Nathan, whose contact information will be included in the slide deck. So to kick off our presentation, we have Nathan Lee, partner in charge of advisory services and technology services, and he's going to tell you what we're going to talk about today.
Great, thank you, Kate, and thank you all for joining us today. Welcome. We're looking forward to diving into a subject that I know is near and dear to your hearts, and something that I know companies are paying close attention to, especially in the current environment where we all anticipate some increased scrutiny and increased regulation from the Cfbp and state regulators and others. And so we're excited to present this webinar for you today, and hope that you find it valuable. And so appreciate you all for joining us today from wherever you are. So as Kate mentioned, I'm Nathan Lee, the partner in charge of the advisory practice here at Ritchie May. And within the advisory practice, we do a variety of things from a compliance standpoint and also a technology standpoint. And what we're going to be talking about today really is the marriage of the two. Really, it is leveraging technology to enhance and improve compliance, regulatory compliance, particularly around social media. And so I'm joined today on this webinar by Melissa Thomas, who is the head of compliance at ActiveComply, who we'll introduce briefly here in a moment, and Michael Dunn, who is the general counsel of FBC Mortgage LLC, and an independent lender out of the Orlando area. So I'm pleased to be joined by the two of them, and welcome them here onto the webinar with us as well. So thanks for joining, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. Good to have you guys. Looking forward to a good conversation. As Kate mentioned, it's going to be fairly conversational here in the beginning. There will be a demonstration of the platform that is done a little bit later on here in the webinar, but in the early part of this webinar, it'll be fairly conversational. There's going to be a discussion between Melissa and Mike on a number of questions that are important and relevant in the current environment, and then we'll take some questions from those of you that are participating in the webinar today, and then we'll do a demonstration for you towards the end of today's webinar. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. As all of you know that are on this webinar, you know, social media is an area that companies have been allocating more and more resources, more and more effort in recent years, because their borrowers are consuming a lot of social media and are engaged in a number of social media platforms. And so, you know, financial institutions, including mortgage companies, are leveraging those platforms in a variety of ways to market, to attract borrowers, to advertise, to gather feedback from borrowers, gather customer satisfaction information, to monitor what kind of information is being put out there in social media, related to their companies to help manage kind of reputation, branding, and so on. And so the platforms, as we all know, are taking on a significant role in all of our lives, and we consume a lot of information via social media, and mortgage companies are no exemption to that, and are certainly engaged in and actively participating in social media. However, since that form of communication can be a little bit more casual and informal, and since it tends to be decentralized and isn't just managed by the company itself centrally within a marketing department, for example, loan officers and branch managers and others kind of out in the field in branch locations scattered all over the country, and sometimes quite a ways away from the corporate headquarters and from the corporate marketing and other staff that may be engaged in working with social media, it can pose some risks. And the FFIEC social media guidance is complex, and compliance risk management expectations can be challenging to try to meet. And so, and as I mentioned, we all anticipate in the current environment with the current administration and the CFPB taking on more responsibility around enforcement, and state regulators that are getting more active and will likely become more active, including state level CFPBs, if you will. Companies are preparing themselves for an environment where there's added scrutiny placed on social media and the information that companies put out there via social media. And so the importance of monitoring that, staying on top of it, is really important. And that's one of the reasons why we felt like this was an area that was important for us as a firm at Ritchie May to bring some solutions to our clients. We've been involved in the compliance area for a number of years, and work with clients around internal audit and subservicer oversight and a number of other compliance areas. And we've seen this social media compliance area take on added importance, significance for clients in the last couple of years, and through a couple of clients of ours were introduced to the team at ActiveComply. And so we're excited to introduce the partnership formally today on this webinar to those of you that are participating, and excited to be joined by Melissa from ActiveComply, and excited about the resources and the capabilities that the ActiveComply platform brings to really automating, scanning, and helping companies resolve and deal with the social media activity of all of their employees, regardless of where they're located and regardless of the platform that's being used to communicate information out to borrowers or to the public at large. And so ActiveComply has a great record, and a number of mutual clients that we work on together have been very, very pleased with the work done by ActiveComply. Have a great team and do exceptional work. And so with that, I'd like to bring Melissa and Mike back in here and hand the mic over to the two of them, and so that they can introduce you guys more fully to ActiveComply and talk about the challenges that exist today around social media compliance. So Melissa and Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Nathan, for that warm introduction and the kind words about Ritchie May and ActiveComply. We're happy to get together. Today we're going to talk about a couple of different things that have everything to do with social media compliance, and how automation is really the solution that you need in your compliance department to achieve it. And I think that that's the way that the mortgage industry is moving for a lot of different departments, is automation is becoming more and more intertwined with how we do business. So today we're definitely going to talk about some of the regulations around social media compliance, like FFIEC, fair lending, RESPA, definitely big concerns this year specifically. Some best practices for lender partners to keep in mind. We'll talk about the cheat sheet that we also have available at the end for everyone who attends today. That'll be a nice little white paper to take home to your departments. And then discussing the ActiveComply system functionality. Thanks for joining me today as well, Mike and Kate, for being our moderator.
Sure, no problem. I just by way of introduction, my role at FBC Mortgage is general counsel, so I am an attorney, but I also oversee the compliance department, and I am the company's fair lending officer, where we are required to monitor our advertising activities, handle customer complaint resolution, and things like that. So all of it is somewhat intertwined. So I'm looking forward to the discussion as well.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you both for joining us.
Well, I think we can hop into the discussion if our panelists don't mind. We'll start off with the question. There's a ton of regulations out there for lenders. How does that apply to social media?
So I can jump in, Melissa. From my perspective, I think of things in terms of kind of big picture. So for me, as the compliance officer for the company, yes, it's important to make sure that social media post has the NMLS number tagline on it and has the equal housing lender logo and the kind of the formalities, the check the box items. But the things that kind of keep me up at night are the big picture items, like the potential RESPA violations that are taking place outside of our purview, or the websites that loan officers are putting up without disclosing it to us, or the drop boxes that are being used to keep private consumer data that loan officers and loan origination teams are using outside of our knowledge. So those are kind of the things that keep us up at night, or keep me up at night as the compliance guy. But also, if I just listen to the CFPB and the agencies in their webinars, and specifically the Consumer Compliance Outlook webinar late last year, I think it was put on as in a reaction to the unrest that was happening over the summertime. There was a reaction, and so I want to pay attention to what that reaction by the agencies were. And what I took away from that webinar primarily was fair lending is going to be on the agenda for all of these agencies. And not only the typical agencies that we're used to, the CFPB, some of the typical state regulators that do fair lending exams, but also what is this new administration going to require by way of the FHFA and Fannie and Freddie? Are Fannie and Freddie going to start getting into the fair lending monitoring game? And so when we think about fair lending monitoring, we think about statistical analysis on one side, but also how are we handling customer complaints and advertising online, more specifically with our advertising. So we certainly do not want to be the poster child for some silly post that a loan officer made without our knowledge that was offensive to a group, and now we're the latest cancel culture victim. That's not what we would like to have happen. So what we've done is we've engaged with the ActiveComply group so that we can kind of get ahead of any of these big picture type of concerns. And also it looks really good because what we're noticing is that a state regulatory agency, when they come in for an exam, typically at least a handful of the agencies, what we found is they'll do a scrub of your online presence before they even come in for the exam, because they want to know kind of what level of compliance monitoring are we dealing with here. So they're going to be able to see, and we had one before we engaged with ActiveComply. We had one state regulator who his first intro call with us to do an introduction to the exam was a list of our violations on social media by loan officers on LinkedIn and Facebook and things like that we thought we were paying somebody to monitor, but it turns out that person was missing a lot of stuff. So we're finding that the regulators are using online presence as kind of a gate, a look into your compliance monitoring program overall, just to see how engaged you are as a compliance department. So we thought it was really important to get a third-party solution for that, and so that's why we moved in that direction.
So true. I mean, there are all kinds of concerns on social media, both personal and, from a business perspective, most definitely. And what's really interesting about social media, as opposed to some of the other marketing avenues in the past, is that before your marketing team had a hold of it, right? And you hope that they know what they're doing, right, when they're developing that content. But it's really tricky when your sales force is their own marketing departments. And they don't necessarily think about it, but what they're posting on social media, their NMLS ID is there, your company name is there, that is advertising. So when it comes to regulatory insight, it's really anything that has to do with marketing regulation for the mortgage industry still applies to social media. So that means state record retention requirements have to be met. You as a lender are responsible for hanging on to mortgage advertising for 2, 3, 4 years, depending on the state. That's really hard to do if all your LOs are posting twice weekly and then you have 400 of them. So it's nearly impossible without some sort of automation. Not to mention, being aware of all the social media that was out there that they didn't disclose to you on websites you weren't familiar with. So it's a daunting task for any compliance department to kind of overcome, along with answering exams and getting all that other information of the day-to-day ready. Something else to keep in mind outside of just state record retention requirements and state specific requirements is the Ffiec guidance that Nathan mentioned earlier. So it really outlines the guidelines that lenders are supposed to follow when it comes to social media and what your responsibilities are. And without going through all 20 pages or so of the document, what it really says is that lenders are responsible for measuring, monitoring, identifying, even controlling the risks related to social media. You're responsible for what your LOs are out there saying. You have to have a risk management process in place, a written policy. You have to have reporting metrics in place. You need to have a fail-safe plan if something really bad happens. And this whole plan has to be commensurate with the size of your social media presence. And that can vary depending on how big of a lender you are, what kind of marketing you do, what kind of products you offer. So those are definitely things to keep in mind when you're thinking about the regulations that are applicable to social media.
Thank you for going over all those regulations. So what are some of the basic recommendations for a lender's social media policy?
Well, from my perspective, again, having one is number one, because you're going to be asked that question in boardrooms and in due diligence reviews and in audits. And so you better have one. Second piece is, following it. So having it written on paper, or if you purchase it from a company, or if you draft it yourself, it's typically best to draft it yourself or to borrow from a template from a friend and maybe add to it specifics. But within our policy, we have specific sections with regards to advertising and the truth in lending rules, record retention, and the typical compliance with your regulations. But we also have a corrective action protocol, so that if we notice that there is a violation of policy, we take some specific corrective action. Our policy calls for us to take some specific corrective action, document that corrective action, so that we can show anybody that asks that we are monitoring appropriately and we are taking corrective action appropriately. And the third piece of that is obviously documenting the corrective action and actually doing what you say you're going to do. So we document our corrective action through the use of our ActiveComply software. There's a very handy screen that documents it for us. Before we got ActiveComply, it was really tough to document corrective actions because there was just so many little violations here and there that it was very difficult and cumbersome to document that. Through the ActiveComply software, there's a specific box and follow-up requirements for compliance to do corrective action. So I think what a regulator is looking for overall is that you're monitoring, that when you notice a violation, you're taking corrective action, and that there's some change that prevents repeat violations. And so that's what we make sure is contained within our PMPs.
And to that point, when it comes to best practices, Mike's hitting the nail on the head. You have to have a base of what is the best practice, what's your policy for the company, what's your risk tolerance level, what are you willing to accept, what aren't you? And to that point, a lot of lenders, haven't done anything about social media until recently. And so it's very much the Wild West with LOs out there finding their own book of business. And it's really hard to get a wrangle on that. And what we see very often is that the beginning of your social media policy is something along the lines of, don't do anything bad, please and thank you. And what we have discovered is that you should really be a little bit more specific when you're making these outlines for LOs, that you're providing them with some social media training on specific do's and don'ts for your company. Some best practices, which we include in our cheat sheet, which we'll definitely give to everybody here today, are really simple and easy to accomplish as a lender organization. So for example, having standard cover photos that are available in a content library that have all of those check boxes when it comes to state by state or federal regulation, that you can say to your LOs, you must pick from one of these 8 different cover photos to work with. Or making sure that they have a standard disclosure that's included on every about section of their social media profile, taking advantage of tools like Linktree, which some may be unfamiliar with, but really it's just a link to other pages that are important, like your privacy policy, your legal licensing link, your disclosures page, and trying to do at the end of the day, what's best for the consumer. What are you doing to be above board? How are you making sure that nothing's deceptive? Because that's what the regulator is going to want to see, and you're going to have a stronger argument that you've done your best to have those protections in place.
And then just one other thing to add, Melissa, is we're seeing an increase in loan originators that want to market in other languages other than English, and so we have to address that in a policy. It's a matter of us deciding as a business what is going to be our policy for advertising in non-English languages, and determining how we go about monitoring social media with those types of advertisements as well.
Yeah, and that's an example of being specific, how FBC has said, here's something that's important that we have seen and that we want to make affirmative action on before we have any issues later on down the line. This can be also true for individual social media platforms, like maybe ones that you haven't heard of before. You can put in your policy that you're not allowed to have any social media affiliated with the company unless you first have it cleared through the marketing and compliance department if it's affiliated with the business. Very often LOs will just make social media and then it's just out there in the ether and you had no idea that they were doing that kind of representation. And sometimes some social media is built differently than others. For example, Alignable is a social media platform that we've seen on the rise at ActiveComply, and it's somewhat concerning because Alignable is a small business referral website, and that word referral really makes me itch as a compliance person with RESPA at the back of my mind. And it says, who's your ideal customer? And we're seeing demographic or specific locales in this free-form text, which could be, a fair lending or redlining issue. We're also seeing that it's being spread throughout the organization. It's not just loan officers, it's also processors and underwriters who are signing up, thinking that they're just being a good buddy of the LO, but now you've got potential for unlicensed activity. So before you say yes, definitely outline in your policy, what's accepted when it comes to social media, and definitely investigate before you dive into any new platforms or allow that kind of access.
All right, well, the representation of your business is extremely important. How should lenders deal with consumer complaints on social media in that case?
Well, every complaint is unique, and case by case is the way we deal with it, because it can range all the way from a minor gripe on up to a very serious type of complaint. So we have to categorize it at first. We have to be able to determine what is something that really needs to be escalated and addressed by senior management versus something that could be handled. Maybe they didn't enjoy their customer service experience, and they need they just need somebody to listen to them and accommodate them with something. So we have kind of levels of complaints, but we've started to see these things come in from non-traditional. Typically, before it was either Better Business Bureau, Cfpb, or they would just send the complaint to the the general email address for your company. Now they could come in on Facebook, Instagram, Alignable, which I just heard about just right now for the first time. We even saw a complaint come in on Yelp for us as a mortgage company. So we didn't know we needed to monitor Yelp, but we found it through ActiveComply's monitoring service, and we were able to address the issue directly with the consumer. But the biggest thing with regards to dealing with consumer complaints is dealing directly with the consumer, finding out exactly what the issue is and working to correct it. From my experience, the regulator or auditors want to see that you have an active consumer complaint program. They're not going to necessarily agree with every decision that was made with regards to how you resolved a consumer complaint, and that's okay. But what they really want to see is an active consumer complaint management program. And if you're not even monitoring the internet for these various sources, then how are you actively monitoring that stuff? So that's why we thought it was important. And it really was that Yelp complaint that came through. We were like, what? How could this, who would make a complaint on a mortgage company through Yelp? But they come in all kinds of ways. And so we thought it was important to monitor that.
That's so true. I only go to Yelp for Chinese food, and then suddenly there's been this huge spike for the mortgage industry where we're seeing more and more that, there are branches made for your Omaha, Nebraska branch that you never made, that a consumer made, because it's really easy to make that Yelp page just so they could complain. So there are a lot of items out there in the ether that maybe you weren't aware of, and we're seeing quite the spike in fair lending concerns with a lot of those review platforms. One of the best practices that you can include in your social media policy is having a standardized, complaint review process. Who are the people that are answering these complaints? What's the process for responding? Do you have some templates built up for some of those responses? And very often what you're going to see is that you're not able to do anything about those complaints that are out there. From time to time, we get lender partners who are really eager to get a Yelp page taken down because a consumer has just spammed it and it might not be legitimate complaints. And what a lot of the platforms will tell you is, too bad, so sad. It's a he said, she said, I'm just going to leave it up. But you're welcome to respond if you want. So the best that you can do is protect yourself from a branding standpoint and a public relations standpoint, and try to get that process worked out, get as many brains on the particular comment as you can, definitely work out all the facts. And as Mike said, you have to have that documented. One of the benefits of ActiveComply is we find those complaints as soon as they're made, so we capture that content, and then we capture your corrective action as you make it. So if a regulator comes in and they say, well, hey, we saw this one complaint about a fair lending issue, what can you tell us about it? You'll be able to say, yep, one moment, let me pull it up. You can see on this date, this is how we responded, and we ended up working it out with the consumer. Here's a copy of the email that we had at the end of the day. So there's a lot of ways for you to protect yourself, but you have to be aware to be able to do any kind of protection in the first place.
So what are some other concerns around social media? I mean, staying out of obvious things such as political stuff, but also other things like unlicensed activity, unauthorized activity.
Yeah, it's all concerning as far as I'm concerned. I guess I'm paid to worry somewhat, so I have to be concerned with all of it. But from a high level standpoint, I'm thinking of it in terms of the reputation of the business, and so I want to protect the reputation of the business. I know we do good work. I know we have an entity that strives for compliance 100% of the time. Do we achieve compliance 100% of the time? No, we do not, just like everybody else. So, but we strive to do that. And so what we're really focused on are those, reputational risk areas that are potentially unanticipated. So exactly what you're talking about. I can give an example of somebody from a few years ago in our post-closing department that was making a lot of posts on Facebook about Islamic extremism. She was really focused on that particular political issue. And so what we got was a question from a consumer, a random consumer online, that says, is this the type of person, somebody who's has Islamophobia, is this the type of person you want to employ at your company? And then they blasted that all over FBC, all over the Facebook page and things like that. We didn't even know about these posts and things like that, so there was no way for us to get ahead of it. So I'm thinking in terms of reputation risk. It doesn't matter if it's political. These days, everything is science appears to be political. So I'm not even sure we want to get into any of that stuff on our business pages. What concerns me is those things that we don't know about and that people are posting outside of our purview, but that still have our name somewhat attached to it. So-and-so at FBC Mortgage has this particular opinion. That offends half of the people. And so half of the people are going to end up being offended, and then we have to consider what our reputation risk is and how we're going to deal with that. So those are the issues that I think about, and just thinking about in terms of how we react to some of these things. If we were to end up on the cover of the Wall Street Journal for this person's Facebook posts, would our company be proud of how it reacted to it, and would we stand by our response? And those are the things that I think about.
And you're spot on, because I think those are a lot of what keeps a lot of lender partners up at night, is a lot of those big picture items that you're mentioning. ActiveComply tries to bring peace of mind. We have an inappropriate scan because we know that regulatory compliance isn't the only thing that a lender partner is worried about. So we're finding instances of bigotry or substance use, violence. We're pulling them in, and then lenders get to decide how they want to respond to it. What's their risk tolerance level? What do they find is an appropriate response? Should it be taken down? Is it something that's not really worrisome for them as a lender? And what we also have found is that there was an election year, there's a lot of social justice movements. Quite a few lender partners were eager to turn on our other feature, which was around political terms. We had a very busy January when there were the events in DC. We made a whole new list of trigger terms around words I've never used in my adult life, like insurrection. And so we thought this would probably be important. Those people were plastered all over the news. Can you imagine if your company name was suddenly brought up? Now you're in the fray, when that's not necessarily representative of your brand. So there's a lot of things to be worried about on social media, and a lot of them have lasting effects. So one really particular case is where a mortgage lender had a top employee who had posted on her social media about racial disparities and was really upset with one particular ethnic group. And then a couple months later, some people were let go who happened to be within that ethnic group. They were able to take those social media posts from that top producer and say, hey, this is probably wrongful termination. So that company went through wrongful termination suits for the next 5 years. So there's a lot of concerns on social media outside of just a regulator showing up at your door, to be sure.
How does the change in the Cfbp leadership impact compliance policies?
Well, for me, it's something to pay attention to. I think it's we use a couple different compliance companies for outsourced compliance and consulting, and also just paying attention to their Compliance Outlook webinar. And paying attention to who's being appointed to positions, and also the position papers that are being rescinded by the new administration. It has become abundantly clear to us that RESPA is back on the forefront, and fair lending has probably leapfrogged it, and there's aspects of fair lending with RESPA issues intertwined there, but fair lending for me is at top of mind. And so there's no doubt in my mind that a CFPB exam or a multi-state exam or an exam by particular states that have the reputation for these types of exams will involve a fair lending analysis. And that fair lending analysis will involve our online presence. And that fair lending analysis will involve questions like, how are we handling limited English proficiency consumers, things like that. How are you monitoring your social media and your marketing advertisements to making sure that you're marketing to all groups and you're being inclusive of all groups. Those issues are going to be looked at, and I need to be prepared to answer how we are monitoring that and what our policies are around it. The regulator can disagree with a policy, but if we don't even have a policy, then it's hard for me to stand in a room and defend it because it doesn't exist. So having the policy in place is first and foremost of my concerns.
Definitely. I think the big concerns that we're hearing from regulators and lender partners is that this year is all about fair lending. That's one of the pillars of the new administration, as well as making sure that consumers are taken care of in a fair manner in regards to forbearance, thanks to the pandemic. So those are two big concerns that ActiveComply have made part of our system. Looking for forbearance instances on social media. Have you given your LOs training about it? Do you do your own servicing? Do you have a forbearance page on your website that addresses this? Should LOs be talking about it? Probably not. So that's definitely a concern, as well as Mike mentioned with fair lending, what does your advertising look like? And some of it is not necessarily all super easy to discern. What are the images that you're using of a happy family who are about to be new homeowners? Are they all of the same demographic origin? Needing to have some sort of diversity in who you're appealing to as a consumer base, being able to defend that in the room is definitely a lot more easier if you don't have 20 images of very similar people back to back to back to back.
So going off of that, has your organization made any recent updates to its strategies around social media and online compliance? I'm assuming all the recent events that have happened in past 2020, 2021.
Yeah, well, our engagement with ActiveComply was kind of our first step, and that was before the new administration came in. But our monitoring effort, I mean, as far as prioritization is concerned, I suppose that the new administration has kind of rejuvenated our priority levels of just certain policies, in particular social media monitoring and compliance, website monitoring and compliance. Then there's a third piece of that, which is consumer privacy, because we've seen LOs that are coming up with contact us web pages. Mike's great LO team is available in your state to originate loans. Just submit your information here in this contact us section. That's outside of our purview. We don't know what the consumer is submitting, even though we are required, because it's our brand that is out there online, to retain those records in a secure way. We don't know where that information is going. And so we're out there looking for those things, because a privacy breach is a huge reputational risk as well. You get one major breach that hits the cover of the National Mortgage News, and then all of a sudden you're the poster child for breach. And you don't want to be the poster child for breach, or the poster child for a fair lending violation, or any of that stuff. And so we are, as far as the change, it's just increased our prioritization levels, and we're, I would say we're probably more actively engaged with our software ActiveComply than we have been before.
And to that point, we look to bring the software to our lender partners, to bring in that automation to find those issues as they come up. But what we've made in the past year in preparation is also giving guidance around the policy development. Some things that didn't cross lenders' minds, when they were developing their policy. It's 2021. Now would be a great time to take a second look at that policy, see about making some additions based on the issues you found in your own ActiveComply account, knowing your LOs and how they interact with consumers, making sure they can use that really great tool without fear of losing their license, right? So we've done our best to help give guidance on, here's what other lender peers are doing to get that LO buy-in. or to get your executive team on board when it comes to social media compliance. What specific platforms to be on the lookout for? Which ones are the most concerning? What are regulators saying about claimed versus unclaimed pages? What's the difference between a private page and a business page? You know, what is my risk tolerance level? What do I feel comfortable with? So definitely going beyond just here's the software, good luck, and definitely saying, you know, how can we make sure that you feel like you can sleep at night, Mike Dunn, knowing that you have some protections and you're minimizing that risk from that point.
All right, well, as we're coming up on time before our great video demo, there's a lot of co-marketing opportunities on social media. What should lenders be aware of, and how can they mitigate their risk?
This is a challenge because there's minimal cost involved with creating some of these co-branded advertising campaigns, for lack of a better term. But a loan officer who gets with her buddy who's a realtor, and they say, hey, I got an idea, let's put a co-branded advertisement up on Facebook, and they do that. From my perspective as a compliance officer, I need to have an answer to the question when the regulator comes in and says, hey, compliance officer, how did you document that the mortgage company paid its fair share and the real estate company paid its fair share for that advertising? When two people got together and created some little funny flyer and put it on Facebook, that took them 20 minutes. How do we document what the cost is, and how did we split the cost proportionally? Those are questions that we need to be able to answer. But co-branding is one of those things where you have to have a procedure with regards to that, so that you can document your proportional payments, so that there is no exchange of a thing of value. And then having some guidelines for LOs to follow on paper is very important, so that it's not just, like Melissa said, the Wild West.
And it feels really casual, right? You know, they're out there, they just share their realtor buddies post, you know, and that's the end of the day. They don't really think of it as co-marketing, but that's exactly what it is. You've just shared this open house that's happening on Friday with the 2,000 people you have on your friends list. You know, some regulators are starting to assign dollar amounts to likes or the size of your internet following. How many people are exposed to that because of what you did when they normally wouldn't have? You know, that's advertising, that's co-marketing. So there are a lot of sticky ickies out there on social media, and what we've been hearing is that there are some protections you can take to make a stronger argument against it. So for example, if there is that open house on the weekend, and instead of the LO just sharing the post for the open house, they really need to be a little bit more narcissistic, right? So it needs to be, hey, my customer base, I'm going to be at this open house from 2 to 4 p.m. I'd love to see you there at my table to talk about different financing options. They need to make it about the services that they offer and less about, let me just share this for a buddy. It makes definitely a stronger argument that you're doing what you can as an LO to promote your business. And it's not just about sharing this hopefully to get leads or referrals from a business partner. Also being aware, you know, when you're having those relationships on social media, what's being mentioned besides just the sharing? Is there a fishing trip that's happened between an LO and some realtor buddies? Thanks so much for your continued business. Glad I could buy you guys dinner. That would be concerning, definitely from a RESPA perspective. Or maybe they're exchanging gift cards. You know, that's a thing of value. That's something to be aware of as well.
Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Mike. I don't know if it's okay with you, but we can get into the video and then
sure
questions for after this video, and maybe you can go over some more fun examples of maybe social media horror stories or keeping up with all these social media sites that you monitor. So
that sounds great.
Into that video right now. All right, and just making sure this looks good on your end.
Looks good to me.
Welcome to the ActiveComply system, where social media compliance is made easy. Today, we'll show you how our system ensures you have compliance covered. Let's begin. Welcome to the Executive Reporting Dashboard. Our live, interactive dashboard gives you near real-time information about your company's social media presence. We can see a pinpointed view over the past 7 days. Specifically, we can see the amount of posts over the past week and what amount resulted in policy alerts. We can also see social media trends over the past 6 months for a broader view. Under Assets Monitored, we can see the division of profiles and websites being monitored and archived in the system. On the right, we can see an overview of activity within ActiveComply. How many issues were added to the system for review? How many were resolved and cleared out? And how many remain outstanding? The next question is, how do we even get this information? ActiveComply is integrated with the NMLS consumer access data and automatically pulls in your company branding and licensing information into the system. This makes onboarding a breeze. The system then takes this information and finds instances of your brand and licensing on social media. Then it pulls in those accounts for your review. Here, we have the discovery pipeline. This is where all those accounts come in for inspection. You can see a quick snapshot of information on each account, such as the profile photo and title, the About section and contact info, and what platform the profile is from. Click Enable Monitoring to add it to the system. Yep, that's it. Need a closer look at the profile? Simply click the platform's icon to visit the profile directly without any fuss. Now let's talk about post-content alerts. After accounts have been added to ActiveComply for monitoring and archival, the system will then review the account for any instances of mortgage advertising. Any posts with mortgage advertising trigger terms will automatically be added for your review. The alerts pipeline is where these posts are housed for compliance and marketing review. You can see who made the post and when, which platform it was posted on, and also see what trigger terms were pulled from the post. And bonus, ActiveComply includes image scanning with all accounts for reviewing both images on post content, as well as scanning cover photos for NMLS IDs and equal housing logos. We can see from this example, the term credit score was pulled directly from the infographic and flagged for review. Want to know as soon as an issue arises? Simply flip on the notifications toggle to enable automated email alerts. Profile alerts. In this day and age, social media profiles are really just electronic business cards, and regulators treat them as such. These are generally the most frequently cited items for regulators as well. ActiveComply scans profiles for required information, like NMLS IDs and equal housing information. Our system can also scan for custom information, like your company's privacy policy link, state-by-state information, and company-specific profile verbiage. You can quickly see what a profile is missing here in the Profile Checkup area, and have your loan officer make all required updates at once. Next is collection folders. This is where teams can actively collaborate to successfully execute and document corrective action. Collection folders house a variety of issues and topics. Some folders are created for regulatory items, like RESPA Section 8 or TILA. Other folders are created for items that may need more time to be resolved or need another staff member's assistance. One collection folder is Websites. The Websites folder identifies rogue LO websites that are different from your company domain. You can review these websites from ActiveComply by simply clicking the link to take a closer look. ActiveComply will also find websites that are broken links due to typos. And you can add vanity domains to the platform archival system here to ensure you meet state record retention requirements. As issues are discovered, you can add internal notes to document you and your team's progress on getting issues resolved. In this example, a GoDaddy website was found, and compliance team members are documenting the corrective action process. Beyond mortgage advertising trigger terms, ActiveComply also looks for instances of inappropriate language in social media. These inappropriate language terms are related to violence, substance abuse, racism, and even political terms or social justice movements. Know as soon as a bad review is posted in the complaints collection folder. You'll be able to see when it was posted and can visit the platform to ensure a customer service rep has responded appropriately and in a timely manner before the complaint is escalated to the BBB or the CFPB. Videos can get you and your loan officers into trouble. With the Videos Collection folder, you'll know as soon as a video is posted, so you can review the content and see about getting it updated or removed before a regulator finds it. Trigger terms are words that are related to mortgage advertising in the financial industry. Certain terms require specific disclosures to be considered compliant. Other terms are considered deceptive and may need to be removed. The ActiveComply system comes preloaded with a broad range of industry trigger terms. You can see on the left-hand side some of the trigger words that are included in the ActiveComply system. Worried about specific words? No problem. With ActiveComply, you can easily add your own trigger terms to the system. You can also turn off or modify existing terms to fit you and your team's needs. Here is our advanced trigger term search engine. Want to see what a new trigger finds before putting it into action? Of course. Simply use the advanced trigger term search to test out different terms. Then simply save the trigger term to the account to start tracking alerts for that term. You can add in specific search outlines, like making the term case sensitive, disabling word stemming, or including the term in online review searches. In this example, the user is testing the trigger term forbearance. After seeing the results below, the user can decide to save the term to the system by naming it and selecting Save here. Many clients are able to add terms outside of the norm, like titles of specific product offerings. Some lenders have even added location-specific terms, like sports teams' names, to discourage trademark infringement. You can search through the ActiveComply system by going to the Assets Monitored screen. This is the central location for reviewing all assets that are currently being monitored. From here, you can search for a specific LO by using the search filter here. Only want to see LOs on Instagram? You can choose to look at one service or platform at a time. You can also ensure that all your LOs have a branch location listed by using the state filter here. Beyond loan officers, ActiveComply also monitors and archives company-branded social media accounts. Lenders can opt to mark those accounts as trusted to ensure that the content is being saved for regulatory audits, but that there are no alerts for that account in the system. At ActiveComply, we know that achieving social media compliance requires cooperation of multiple departments, so we've built the system with collaboration in mind. After being onboarded into the ActiveComply system, lenders are able to add in users in the Manage Users features. Easily add in other team members with simply their name and email. Someone has left the team? No worries. You can simply toggle off their access to ensure the system is secure. We encourage you to add other members of your company, from HR, customer service, and IT, to name a few, to collaborate seamlessly. Here's the software. Good luck. No, that's not the ActiveComply way. We know that social media compliance is an ongoing battle, so we do our best to arm our clients with information. We provide support in a variety of ways, from review response templates, to best practices guides, to examples of compliant profiles, to cheat sheets you can give your LOs. We've got the resources to keep your team compliant and successful. Well, we've done our best to make social media compliance a breeze for you and your team. If you're interested in seeing a compliance report or software demo with your company information, please visit ActiveComply.com to learn more about our features and see our client testimonials. Ready to give it a go? Sign up for a demo today to receive an ActiveComply branded goodie box, Yeti wine mug included. Thanks again for your time. We're happy to discuss how our platform can help you meet your social media compliance goals. ActiveComply, compliance covered.
All right, well, thank you for that video. I was just gonna go ahead and jump into the Q&A if that's okay with our panelists.
Sure.
Back to that screen. All right. Nathan. All right, Nathan, if you want to pull up your contact info while we go through this Q&A, that would be awesome. Thank you. So I do have a question from the audience. I'll just read it word for word. I know you touched on Yelp, but what are some other sites similar to Yelp that are more or less online yellow pages that are just listings of LOs and not necessarily managed by the LO? Sites like Foursquare, Bing, etc. Are we to consider those advertisements? Therefore, we would all need the same compliance components as, say, an LO Facebook page, or no?
I could jump in on this one, Mike. So it sometimes is dependent on who made the page. So as we mentioned with Yelp, some of those pages are made by consumers, and what we're hearing from regulators is that it's not fair to you if you didn't know it was out there if the page just got made. But from a claiming standpoint, some of those pages have a claiming or unclaimed feature. If you're going to claim the page, it has to be regulatory compliant. And that way they know that it's affiliated with your business officially. And so you need to bring it up to snuff. As opposed to those pages that are maybe unclaimed, you're not necessarily held to the same regulatory stipulation, but you probably still want to be aware of those based on whatever consumer complaints or compliments might be affiliated with those. So it's important to know, first of all, who made the page, who has control over it. Some other sites that are similar are really based on review items. So there's definitely Zillow, Yelp, Facebook has a reviews feature for those business pages. There's also Alignable, has those referral reviews that are definitely baked in. There's also Google, who has, those Google business pages, for example, that are really more affiliated with your branches or your main company page. So making sure that you're doing your best to make whatever you can up to snuff, most definitely if there's space for it. Some of those business listings don't necessarily have accommodations for you to put in, here's my privacy policy on my Google business page. But if it's linking to your website, it should be within one click away so that you can say to a regulator, I have a stronger argument that I've tried to make this as compliant as I could be. Some social media is not built the same. So for example, Instagram pages, you only get a certain amount of text characters in the about section. So it can be difficult to hit every single one of the check marks. So making sure that you're taking advantage of other tools like the link tree that I mentioned earlier to meet some of those checkboxes instead.
Right, perfect. Well, can leave it just a few more seconds for any other questions coming in.
Sure, great question.
Yeah. Just got one right now. What is the pricing for ActiveComply?
Oh, sure. Okay, so ActiveComply's pricing is based on the size of the organization. We do it based on your LO count, based on NMLS consumer access. It's very much how our billing is connected. And it's commensurate with how busy you are on social media. That's how we do our size gauging. And that pricing is affiliated like that. And Richie May has been a really great partner in all of this for us. So, any additional questions can be funneled through Nathan. I'm sure that he'll add me into those conversations as well.
All right.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
And thanks, Kate. Thanks, Mike, as well, and for joining us here today. It was a great discussion, and that question there at the end around all those other kind of review sites, it's overwhelming. I mean, there are tons of them, and fortunately, as you said, Melissa, there may not be a regulatory compliance concern so much as a reputational concern, and so. But either way, whether it's a regulatory compliance or reputation, it's critical to be focused on social media because there's just so much activity there, and people spend so much of their lives, it seems these days, on social media and posting and sharing opinions about just about everything, and certainly.
And a regulator doesn't have to ask for it; they just go out and see it themselves.
Yeah, they can go and check it out, and so as companies become more and more active and more engaged with social media, it's important to keep an eye on these things. And so we appreciate Melissa and Mike, appreciate you guys joining today and sharing some insight with everybody. And you can see my contact up there on the screen. And if you have some follow-up questions and you want to explore this further with us and the ActiveComply folks, by all means, reach out, send me an email. And we can we can make that happen for you. So thanks everybody again for joining today and taking the time out of your day to be with us here today, and hope you have a great rest of the day and a great week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.